We continue in our message series in the book of Philippians. We are starting chapter 4 today, which is the very last chapter in the book of Philippians. We're on page 815, 816 in the Bibles that are there in the seats around you. If you don't have a Bible with you, please grab one of those. And if you don't have a good Bible at home, please take one of those home with you just as a gift from us. We would welcome you to take one of those home with you. So Philippians chapter 4, if you're going to be a church that impacts the world, that makes a difference in our community, that makes a difference in the lives of other people and experiences, people having lives change and transform and people growing in Christ, then you can't have strife and conflicts and arguments in the life of the church. One of the things that distracts churches from their mission, one of the things that keeps them from being healthy and functioning and doing what they ought to do and living out the life that God has called them to is strife and conflict in the fellowship of believers that make up the life of the church. Conflict and disunity are some of the most destructive things in the life of the church. They keep us from doing what we're supposed to do. They keep us from focusing on the right things. They cause tension. They cause anxiety. They cause stress. They burn up time and resources and energy that could be used and could be applied toward things that matter and toward things that are really important when those things exist in the life of the church. They rob us of our passion for knowing Christ and for making Christ known to other people and engaging in the lives of other people in the world. They cause people inside the church to get burned and to leave the church. And they cause people outside the church to look at the church and go, why do I want that? Why do I want what they have to offer if that's what they're all about? Some of the most harmful things for the health and the effectiveness of a church, for living out its calling and for pursuing Christ and knowing Christ and bringing glory to Him, are conflict and disunity. Now, in my experience, over 20 some odd years in ministry and working in churches and pastoring and youth pastoring, and I've seen my share of conflicts, I've seen my share of arguments and disagreements in the life of the church, and in my experience, the factors that most often cause conflict and division and arguments, even sometimes splits in churches, are not the results of big, major issues. Most of the time, conflicts and divisions in churches are not because there's some massive theological difference. It's not because there's some false teaching going on. It's not because there's different beliefs about the Bible. It's not because of a massive moral failure on the part of leadership. What divides churches and even results in churches splitting, and what destroys the testimony of churches in their community, in my experience, two things often lead to conflicts and disunity in churches, and the two things go hand in hand, and they are gossip and personal relationship issues. Gossip and personal relationship. More than big things, more than massive things, more than significant things in the life of the church, it is typically very small things that often lead to conflict and disunity. More churches have fights, more churches get divided, more churches have nasty business meetings, more churches split over gossip and personal relationship issues than over big things. More church conflict, more destruction in the life and the health of the churches come over small, manageable issues than over big, massive things in the life of the church. In the second year of Crossroads, so about 4 years ago now, we had experienced a lot of growth. We were booming, and really cool and neat things were happening. We had just moved here into the school. In fact, a lot of you got connected with the life of Crossroads during that time frame. But we had some conflict that took place in that time frame. We had a couple of families that just could not get along with each other. I mean, if there was any way that one of them could take wrongly something the other one did, they were going to. And so it just resulted in this sense of conflict, and so we tried to deal with those, we tried to get them together on the same page, and eventually what happened was there were two women who got into a massive, major conflict with each other, turned into this horrible, awful, just fight and gossiping thing over something that happened with one of their daughters. I mean, very manageable kind of situation. A thing that could have been dealt with. And I happened to be out of town in Mexico on a mission trip. Larissa was at a conference in Kansas. We were both out of town and trying to deal with this thing over the phone and get these two ladies to talk to each other. And it turned into this huge gossiping, taking sides issue. And even though we took a very hard stand on the issue, and even though we told everybody involved to stop talking about it, over the course of the next year, so in the second year of the Crossroads, we lost half the congregation. Not as a result of theological error, not as a result of biblical teaching, not as a result of being angry with the pastor, which sometimes happens, but because two ladies had a conflict over their daughter that they could not resolve. Eventually, every person involved in that situation left Crossroads. Or else I wouldn't be talking about it today. You're going to be like throwing stuff at me like that. Eventually, they all left. It was a difficult time in the life of the Crossroads. Division and disunity and conflict can destroy a church, and they often come over silly things, over minuscule things like gossip and personal relationship issues. And that is precisely what Paul is dealing with in Philippians chapter 4. So by the way, that's why I'm talking about this today. It's not like there's some massive undercurrent of disunity going on in the life of the Crossroads. This is what Paul's talking about in Philippians chapter 4. And so just to kind of review, Paul started the church in Philippi during his second missionary journey. And it was a church that Paul had a very close relationship with. He was only there for a very brief period of time, but this church, more than any other, supported and sponsored Paul's ministry throughout the rest of his life. They were a poor church, and yet they gave tremendously to Paul. He had them very close to his heart, and you can sense that in the pages of the book of Philippians. And yet, there was a conflict that was brewing in the church between two women. So I want you to look with me at Philippians chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. He says, "Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way," dear friends. Do you just hear Paul's affection for the church in Philippi there? My brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy, my crown, my dear friends. He says, "I plead with Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche, to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life." So, we don't know the precise nature of the conflict between these two women. Maybe they were just arguing over whose name was weird. I don't know. But there's some sort of conflict that has arisen between these two women. Now, what we do know is that it was not a major theological issue. It's not something massive because Paul doesn't address the issue. Paul doesn't confront what's going on between these two women. It wasn't something like Paul had to deal with in Galatians or Colossians. It wasn't a moral issue, an issue of moral failure, or an issue of spiritual arrogance like we find in 1 and 2 Corinthians. It was simply an interpersonal conflict between two women that was threatening the life of the rest of the church. I don't know, maybe Euodia made some comment on Syntyche's Facebook that she didn't like. Maybe Syntyche criticized Euodia's abilities as a wife when she was talking to another friend, and it somehow gets back to her. I don't know what's going on. Maybe they got in an argument over who got to lead the next Beth Moore Bible study. Maybe Syntyche beat Euodia out for a job promotion. Maybe Euodia's daughter broke up with Syntyche's son. Maybe Syntyche thought homeschooling was the best route, while Euodia felt like it was best to send her kids to public school. We don't know, whatever the source of the conflict was, the main issue was the interpersonal relationship between two people. And that is often the nature of conflict and division and disunity that we most often have to contend with in the life of the church. It's typically not some massive issue. It's typically two people get crossways with each other. It's typically somebody does something that another person doesn't like, and the gossip chain gets started, and people get mad at each other and upset with each other, and so people begin to take sides, and people begin to judge other people as a result, and so conflict arises over all sorts of issues. But Paul felt it significant enough that he needed to deal with it. Even though it's some insignificant conflict between these two ladies, Paul says, "I plead with you. I plead with you, Euodia. I plead with you, Syntyche, to be reconciled, to get this straightened out. So how do you deal with conflict in the church? Because conflict in the church has to be dealt with before it impacts the life and the health of the church and the church's ability to carry out its mission. Now, by the way, the things that we're going to look at today also work in other environments besides just the church. So we're going to talk about how to deal with conflict in the life of the church because that's what's most important to us. But if you've got some other conflict going on, conflict with a spouse, conflict with one of your kids, conflict with one of your neighbors, conflict with somebody at work, these same kind of principles will apply in those areas as well. But we're going to take a look in particular at how you deal with that in the church. So let's take a look at the instructions that Paul gives. First he says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. So he addresses both women individually. And he says to each of them, he says it twice, I plead with Euodia, I plead with Syntyche. So in other words, neither one of them is the main one at fault. He is addressing both of them individually to get on the same page, to work out their differences, to resolve whatever the conflict or the disagreement is between them. So the first instruction is this: work together to overcome the conflict. Work together to overcome the conflict. Set aside your differences and work together on resolving the issue. You see what happens all too often when we have a personal conflict with someone else is we stop trying to fix the problem and we start attacking the other person. Whatever the issue is, whatever the core of what's going on is, begins to be lost in the background of the fact that I'm mad at you and you're mad at me and you did this and I did this and we don't like each other. And so conflict arises that's not necessarily over the heart of the issue anymore. It's just we're mad at each other. And conflict arises. At some point we lose sight of the actual issue and the conflict simply becomes about being angry or upset with the other person. This is a principle I talk about a lot when I am doing premarital coaching or when I'm doing marital counseling with people. It's this: attack the problem, not the person. Attack the problem, not the person. When you start attacking the other person, the problem's not going to get resolved. The problem is not going to get, you've got to focus your effort, focus your attention, focus your energy together on the problem. And so when I talk to couples, I say, look, when you have a problem that arises in your marriage, when you have a problem that arises in your relationship with each other, don't see it as, okay, we're at odds with each other. See the enemy as the problem itself. And work together on focusing on that problem. Figuring out what are we going to do about the problem. Make the main issue the main issue. And don't see yourself at odds with each other. See yourselves as working together to find a solution. So Paul says then be of the same mind in the Lord. Get on the same page. Get on the same team. Work this out together. Be of the same mind in the Lord. Now, that does not mean we have to be in agreement about everything. Okay? Dallas Cowboys are the greatest football team of all time, right? Well, I just created divisions. All right? Hamburgers are the greatest food in the world. Okay? See? Red is the best color. Oh, see, we don't have to be on the same page about everything. We don't have to agree about what football team we like. We don't have to agree about what food or what color we like. We don't have to be in absolute agreement about everything. That's not what Paul's talking about here. What it means is that even when we have conflict with each other, we have a mindset, because we are both followers of Jesus Christ, that supersedes any personal ambition or initiative or desires that we may have. There is something that comes before our own personal interest. There's something that comes before our own personal desires. There's something that comes before the thing that I want, or getting my way, or doing what I want to do. And that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it supersedes everything else that I do. And so you know what? I may not like the color of the carpet that somebody decides is going to be the color of the carpet. I may not like the particular brand of coffee that John buys for the coffee area. I may not like, by the way, I do like Kyle's orange shoes. But I may not like Kyle's orange shoes. Loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength comes before anything else. Loving our neighbor as ourselves comes before anything else. Taking the gospel to the end of the earth, seeing people's lives transformed and changed by the gospel, comes before anything else. What Paul has just said in chapter 3 really and truly comes before anything else. Remember in chapter 3, Paul says, when I look at everything else in my life, when I look at all the other things that I could count as worthy or valuable or as gains in my life, I count them all lost. I count them all manure. I count them all garbage in comparison with knowing Christ and gaining Christ and being found in Christ. And knowing Christ, even in knowing the power of His resurrection, and knowing even the fellowship of sharing in His sufferings, and pursuing Christ with all that I am. He says that's what's most important. He says, get on the same page. Be of the same mind. He's echoing what he says in Philippians chapter 2. The very same language he used in Philippians 2. And there he says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Or have this same mindset in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Although he existed as God, he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself. And he took on the form of a servant. And being found in nature as a human being, he emptied himself, took on the form of a servant, and he became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God is highly exalted and given the name that's above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. What is the mindset that Paul says we ought to have? It's the mindset of Jesus Christ, who says, I'll give it all away for somebody else. I will lay down my rights. I will lay down my prerogatives. I will lay down my divinity and my rights of divinity so that I may give my life on the cross, so that people may come to know me. He says to Euodia and Syntyche, have that mindset. Give your life away for somebody else. Pour your life out for someone else. Be of the same mind with each other, an attitude of humility and sacrifice and laying down my life for others. The New Testament is full of this kind of instruction. Let me show you just a couple of places. Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 and 24. This is Jesus talking. He says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. Jesus says, hey, if you are coming to worship me, if you are coming there and you realize that another believer has an issue with you, go and get that straightened out before you try to worship. You see, a conflict with another believer will affect your relationship with God. A conflict in the life of the church will affect your ability to worship. It will affect your ability to tell God that you love Him and to engage with Him. You see, when my kids are having a fight with each other, it affects every other relationship in the family. I mean, it's not just the two of them that are fighting. All of a sudden, I find myself on edge, and everybody else is on edge. And before you know it, I mean, it's just this whole big Royal Rumble that's going on. Just because two of them were in a fight with each other. Jesus says, if you've got conflict with another brother or sister, get it straightened out before you come to worship. Get it straightened out before you come to tell me how much you love me. 1 John chapter 4 says, if anyone says he loves God and he hates his brother, he is a liar. And the truth is not in him. You cannot say you love God if you are actively engaged in hateful relationships with a brother or sister. So you got to get those straightened out. Being on the same page, being in harmony, is so important that we must do everything in our power to maintain that harmony. Take a look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3. It says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Go to extremes when it comes to keeping the peace. The option we do not have is to give up. be of the same mind. Now take a look at the next thing Paul does. Paul addresses a third party with instructions. He says, yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Now, we don't know who the true companion was. There's lots of different guesses about who it might have been, but we don't know for sure. But Paul calls on someone else, and he says, I want you, my true companion, to help them get this thing sorted out. So not only does he call on this person to help them, but he also points to other people in the body who can also serve as reminders to them about what is really important and the need to reconcile with each other. You see, when there's a conflict between two people in the church, you may not be a part of the problem, but you can be a part of the solution. And that's the next instruction. Be a part of the solution. Don't just sit on the sidelines and watch if there's conflict between two people. If you've got friends who have a broken relationship, you need to be actively engaged in bringing peace between them. When there's conflict in the church, it's not just the responsibility of the people who are in the conflict with each other to work things out. It is also the responsibility of the rest of the church to apply some encouragement and some pressure on them to work things out, to get it sorted out. Now let me tell you how you don't help out. You don't help out by listening to one side of things, listening to one person and say, you know what, you're right. They are just horrible. I can't believe they did that to you. They are terrible people. And just continue to encourage them in their own attitude. You don't go and tell other people about it and cause the chain of gossip. You don't just say, well, you know what, I'm going to pray about that. You know what, that's the Christian way of saying, I'm not going to do anything. I heard you, I'll pray about it. Okay? That's not, now don't get me wrong, you do need to pray about it, but what you do is you tell them, you need to go to the other person to get this sorted out. Don't allow them the option of just coming to you and unloading on you about how awful this other person is. You say to them, have you talked to them about this? Have you gone back to them? Hey, if you need somebody to go with you, I'll be happy to go with you. I'll be happy to serve in whatever way I can to talk to this person with you. You offer them your encouragement, you offer them your support, and you hold them accountable to whether or not they're following through. You know, they come back around to you, oh man, I can't believe they're still doing this. You know, they sent their daughter to the prom with the same dress as my daughter. I don't know, something like that. They like the Redskins. I'm not mentioning any names, but it rhymes with Randy Sellers. I support the Redskins. I'm a Cowboys guy, something like that. When they come back to you and you say, have you talked to them? Have you gone back to them? Have you sought to fix this situation with them? You hold them accountable to what they're supposed to do. If they don't try to sort things out with the other person, you refuse to listen anymore about the situation. You haven't talked to them? Then I'm not talking to you about it. We're not engaging in this conversation anymore until you do something about the conversation. You see, you've got to be a peacemaker, not a pot stirrer. Peacemakers sacrifice. Peacemakers do difficult things. Peacemakers are willing to say to somebody else, hey, you got to do what's right. Or I'm going to get in your face if you don't. Be a peacemaker. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. You know, it's one of the primary responsibilities of the leadership of the church to maintain harmony in the life of the church. That's why if you're going to start a conflict, if you're going to stir up trouble, if you're going to start gossiping at the Crossroads, you can expect a phone call or a visit from me or Corey or Greg. We're serious about it. We're serious about maintaining unity and being of the same mind and being on the same page because we know and understand the destructive power of gossip and conflict and disunity and division in the church, and we're going to do everything we can to guard against it. By the way, we expect you to do the same thing. We expect you to so love the Crossroads life of the church. Now let me take a look at one last instruction that Paul gives for dealing with conflict. He said, they've contended at my side in the cause of the gospel. Paul reminds them of what's really important, of their partnership together with Paul, of the hard work and the hours and the effort of sharing the gospel with other people. Paul is saying, hey, I know you have a disagreement, but I plead with you to remember what really matters, to remember the gospel, and to be reconciled to each other. So the last instruction for dealing with conflict is keep your focus on the gospel. Keep your focus on the gospel. You see, focusing on the gospel does two things for you. First, it helps you keep things in perspective. There are people around you who don't know Jesus Christ. There are people in your life who, apart from the message of Christ, will die and spend eternity in hell. That's what matters. That's what's important. There are people who need the hope that we have to offer. There are people whose lives are self-destructing all around them, and we have the hope they need, and we have the life they need, and we have the only thing that can save them. And all around us is a world of people who will spend eternity in hell without Christ, and conflict robs us of time and effort and energy to tell other people about Jesus Christ. And it's not worth it. The gospel is our priority. The gospel is what matters. The conflict robs us of the desire to tell other people about Jesus. Conflict causes us to turn our focus inward instead of outward toward other people. Conflict damages our witness to a world that needs to hear what we have to offer, so that they say, why do I care what you have to say? Why do I want to listen to you? We can't afford to lose focus on the gospel. We can't afford to lose focus on the fact that the thing that really matters is Jesus Christ and telling other people about him. If we'll focus on what really matters, if we'll focus on the gospel, then there are a lot of other things that don't matter near as much. You know, one of the principles I give to you is I want you to think in terms of eternity. Think in light of eternity. When it comes to conflict, when it comes to things that trouble you, when it comes to things that worry you in life, there are a lot of things that if you'll ask yourself this simple question, they really won't matter. The question is this: what's this going to matter 10,000 years from now? What's it going to matter 10,000 years from now? What's it going to matter 100 years from now? What's it going to matter? I mean, there are things that we get all worked up over that aren't going to matter 10 years from now, that aren't going to matter 5 years from now. Heck, there are things in our lives that we get worked up over that aren't going to matter a week from now. You need an eternal perspective. You need to be able to ask yourself the question, what does it really matter? It doesn't matter for all of eternity. See, I know there's one thing that matters for all eternity. And it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it has the power to transform somebody's life for all eternity. And so I need to look at my life in light of the gospel. And so Paul writes to these two women, and he says, hey, remember how you contended at my side. Remember how we worked together in the work of the gospel. Keep your focus on that. Now the second thing focusing on the gospel does is it reminds me of who I am. The gospel says we are all broken people. It says we are all sinners who have rebelled against God. It says there is none righteous, not even one. It says that the only hope that any of us have to be made right with God and have a relationship with him is the grace of God demonstrated to us through the cross of Christ as Jesus gave his life in our place as a payment for our sin. Now, if I understand who I am in light of that, then what right do I have to be in conflict with another believer? It is only through the grace and mercy and love and forgiveness of God through Jesus Christ that we are able to be a part of the church and a part of God's family. Take a look at Colossians chapter 3, verse 13. 3:13. It says, bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. See, the standard for our relationship with other people is not whether they are worthy or deserving. The standard for our relationship with other people is not how nice they are or how much they like, how much we like them. The standard is not what they've done to me and what my rights are and what has happened to me. The standard is what Jesus Christ has done for me. I am duty and honor bound to show to other people in my life. Because I have been forgiven by Christ, I am required to forgive others. Jesus told the story this way. There's a man, a servant, who comes, he's dragged before the king, and he owes thousands and thousands of dollars. He owes a lifetime worth of money. He's in debt to the king. And so the king is going to have him executed. The man begins to beg and plead with the king, please forgive me, please, don't do this to me. And so the king forgives him all the debt that he owes. This massive debt. And lets him go free. Now this guy walks out of the palace and he sees another friend who owes him a couple of bucks. And he grabs him and he begins to choke him and strangle him, and he says, you've got to give me everything that you owe me. You've got to give me every last penny that I am due and that I deserve. The king's servants see him and they bring him back before the king, and the king says, you're going to be executed because you didn't understand my forgiveness for you. Listen, if we understand the ocean of forgiveness that God has poured out on us through Jesus Christ, then we have no right to hold back drops of forgiveness to other people in our lives. If we really understand what Christ has done for us on the cross and the forgiveness that God has given to us, then we should be able to extend that forgiveness and that mercy to other people in our lives. And by the way, we also understand that we're messed up people too. When you're in conflict with another person, it's not as if there's a perfect person and an imperfect person in that relationship. It's always two imperfect people. It's always two sinners that are in conflict with each other. And you know what we most often want from somebody else is we want them to extend grace to us when we're the ones that are at fault or we're the ones who are in the wrong. We got to extend that same thing to other people. To extend them grace, to extend them mercy, to offer them life, because we've experienced that through Jesus Christ, because He's given it to us, and so we gladly give it to other people. You see, conflict and division in the church belittles the gospel. God, I want you to understand that. I want you to know that. That when we get in conflict with each other in the life of the church, we're taking the light off of Jesus. We're pointing it at ourselves. We are taking away from His glory. We are taking away from the credit that He deserves. We're taking the focus off of Him and putting it on ourselves. That's why conflict is cancer in churches. Because we only exist for one person. Jesus Christ. And to point to Him, not to us. So we must do everything we can to keep our focus on Jesus. Everything we can to keep our focus on the gospel. Everything we can to keep our focus on the mission that God has called us to. Take a look at Romans chapter 12, verse 18. Romans 12, 18. Paul says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, it's not always possible. Okay? So sometimes it's just impossible to live at peace with someone because they are engaged in a sinful activity and they refuse to repent and they refuse to turn back to Christ, and that sin is the center and the core of the conflict, and so sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes it's impossible because they refused to be reconciled to you. Despite your every effort, despite your desires, they have no desire, no intention to be reconciled with you. But what you've got to do is that middle part where Paul says, as much as it depends on you, you do your part. You do what you can. Don't worry about what they're doing. Don't worry about what they're saying. Don't worry about how they are acting. As much as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now let me tell you something. If you are in a church long enough, you will experience conflict. I promise you. I don't care how good a church it is. Okay? I mean, even here in the life of the Crossroads, we want to do everything we can to honor Christ and to follow Him. But if you're in a church long enough, you're going to experience conflict. There are going to be people in the church that you don't get along with. Okay? There just are. There are going to be people you don't like just because you don't like their face. You know what I'm talking about. Just seeing them makes you mad, you know? There are going to be people that you just don't get along with. There are going to be people you don't like. There are going to be times that you get on each other's nerves. But if you're going to be a part of the Crossroads, we are committed that conflict and disunity will not deter us, distract us, or define us. Because there's something more important. There's something that matters more. These are the principles that we are committed to as a church. If conflict arises between us and another person, we commit. By the way, when I say we, okay, I'm talking about you, all right? So today, when I say we commit, you're saying, yeah, sign me up. That's what I'm here for. We commit that if conflict arises between us and another person, we commit that we will work together to overcome the conflict, that we will attack the problem, not the person. We commit that if we know of a conflict between other people, we commit to be a part of the solution, not the problem, that we will be a peacemaker, not a pot stirrer. We commit that we will keep our focus on the gospel, that we will focus on a world that needs Jesus, not on our own selfish desires. We commit to those kind of things. Now, listen, I want to be honest. Maybe you're here today and you've been hurt by conflict in the church. I guess a lot of you probably have. It's sad but true that we wound our own often. So let me tell you a story. I grew up in Arkansas, so this is an Arkansas story. I don't know if y'all know this, there's lots of chicken houses in Arkansas. Yeah. So when I was a kid in school, one of our field trips was to go to the hatchery, see what they do at the hatchery. The last thing they do at the hatchery before they send baby chicks to the chicken houses is they take this hot iron and they burn the end of their beaks. You know why they do that? Because chickens, if they see an injury, if they see blood, they'll jump on the other chicken and peck it to death. So they blunt their beaks so they can't do that. Listen, it's sad but true, but a lot of churches are like chickens. I mean, it is so grievous that we see a wound and we attack and we jump on it. Jesus says that we're to bear each other's burdens. We're to carry each other's hurts. And when one of us is hurting, the rest of the body should respond, not in attack, but should respond in love. So some of you may be here today and you've been pecked a lot. And I want to say to you, I'm sorry for that. But I also want to say to you, that's not the way church is supposed to be. And that's not the life that Jesus has called us to. And I want you to know that there's healing, there's love, there's forgiveness in Jesus Christ. Some of you, maybe you wrote off church because of that. Because something bad happened and you're like, man, I'm not going back. Man, don't judge Jesus on the basis of what some of his imperfect kids do sometimes. Because we do make mistakes. But in him, you'll find perfect love and healing. I want you to bow your head for me this morning. from our hearts to God, that we will work together to overcome conflict. That we'll be a peacemaker, not a pot stirrer. That we will do